Welcome to the Advantage Workshop with Jennifer O'Connell from Compliance Vanguard. In today's workshop, Jennifer will explain the strategies that not only optimize compliance, but also help minimize errors, which is a critical advantage for any healthcare organization striving for both excellence and efficiency. Jennifer brings a wealth of expertise in regulatory compliance, especially within surgical departments, where she focuses on designing time and cost saving concepts. Her work blends the essential elements of life safety with the day to day operational needs that surgical teams face. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer O'Connell.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to do this today. So today we're going to discuss designing the surgical department to save you time and money, which is obviously very important for all of us. So just a little bit more about me. I am a degreed fire protection engineer. I have been working in healthcare facilities for now over 25 years, which is a little bit frightening to me. But I love working in healthcare because literally I feel like if I've seen it all, I really haven't, because there's always something new that I'm witnessing when I'm walking around different healthcare facilities. So as we know, we need that Medicare, Medicaid money to make sure that we can operate appropriately in our healthcare space. And to do that, we need to meet the requirements of CMS. And then CMS gives that, shall we say, help uses different accrediting organizations to document that different healthcare facilities are meeting their requirements. Now, these four that I have on the slide are just four of many accrediting organizations, so you might use different ones. However, they all are required to apply the requirements of NFPA 101, which is the Life Safety Code. But note that it is the 2012 edition. That is the edition that CMS currently uses. This can be an issue when we're talking about design, because sometimes our design team, our architects, aren't clear on what the CMS requirements are. So they might either not apply the Life Safety Code at all to their design, or they might apply a newer edition of the Life Safety Code, which the current one is the 2024 edition, which has different requirements, especially for what we're talking about today. So we're going to discuss the challenges to surgical departments, specifically the environmental challenges. So we're not talking about clinical, we're not going to talk about staff challenges, but more how the surgical department is constructed, how the building is constructed, and how that construction impacts what we do within the surgical department. So many of our challenges are, of course, storage. Literally no surgical department has enough space for storage because we constantly have changing equipment. As technology changes, our equipment changes. Sometimes it gets larger, sometimes it gets smaller, but we're always bringing in new equipment that we want within close proximity to our actual operating rooms. The other challenge we get from the construction standpoint is the actual access to the OR room itself, because our staff is obviously trying to maintain a sterile environment. They've already scrubbed. They don't want to have to turn a handle or a knob to open the door to access the actual OR room. In addition, we are moving patients in and out of that room from a gurney. We're rolling them in, putting them on the OR table, rolling the gurney back out. No staff member wants to have to open a door via a doorknob or a handle. Again, that creates problems with our sterile environment. So those are our main challenges when we're dealing with surgical suites. Now, these are just a couple pictures of the things that I've seen in my life as walking around in different healthcare facilities. These three pictures are all three specifically from a surgical department. As you can see, we have equipment just spewing out everywhere just because it's in close proximity, and we might have run out to grab something and then kind of wheeled it back out and thrown it there as we go back into the OR room, because obviously our patients are our most important concept. But I did want to point out this one picture that shows the gurney in front of the fire extinguisher and the manual pull station and the door to the stair. This literal concept of this picture would end up in 4 different citations based on the requirements of CMS, because we have storage in the egress corridor, we have storage blocking the fire extinguisher, we have storage blocking the manual pull station, and we have storage blocking the exit. So these are all things that we're constantly trying to negotiate when we're dealing with surgical departments, because we want that gurney in close proximity to our operating room door. So here's another example of the other concept that we're trying to deal with, which is our actual OR room access. As you can see from the one picture, the staff is accessing the OR room with sterile hands. Again, we talked about the fact we don't want to have to turn a knob. We don't want to have to turn a handle to access that room. You can see in these 3 pictures, which are the most common ways to put doors in front of an OR. We usually have either a sliding door, just a door, double doors that just open either automatically or with self-closers, like in our single door with the staff member entering the space. So how do we alleviate these challenges in healthcare facilities? Again, and this is regular hospitals, this could be ambulatory surgical, any of the places where we're dealing with a true surgical department, is applying the concept of suites. Now, I just said in terms of ambulatory surgical or healthcare, the concept of a suite only applies to a healthcare occupancy, okay? So we need to make sure we understand that very clear, that as we step forward into this presentation, we are talking about surgical departments, whether they be ambulatory, i.e. day surgery, or they be inpatient surgical departments. In those cases, the occupancy classification of those spaces must be a healthcare occupancy, not an ambulatory healthcare occupancy. And we'll discuss that in just a few extra steps. So what is a suite? Again, in a healthcare occupancy. A suite is a grouping of rooms and spaces that once we classify it as a suite, we then are really looking at it as one large room. Now, there might be little rooms within that space, but we are really looking at it as if it was one large room, which means we no longer have egress corridors, which is what we're trying to get rid of. That's going to alleviate our problems in our surgical departments. There are very specific limitations for what can be called a suite, and we will go through those. But our surgical departments and our prep recovery PACU departments, we really want to classify those as suites. Surgical departments, based on what we're talking about, prep recovery PACU, because we have open bays where our patients are recovering or prepping, things like that. So we definitely need to call those suites. We would classify these spaces as patient care non-sleeping suites. Now, I know that doesn't make sense because the patients in this space are most likely sleeping because of anesthesia. But the classification is based on the fact that we're treating the patients and there's lots of staff around them. What is classified as a sleeping suite applies to spaces where our patients are actually in a bed in a room and the staff is not having as much interaction with them as in these treatment areas. So again, surgical departments, we would classify them as patient care non-sleeping suites. These requirements are found both in the life safety code, so for CMS requirements, and in our building code, which is what we see generally with our local authorities, our state authorities, and our design professionals. They're usually using the building code when we're designing spaces. So here's your standard surgical department. This is a small community hospital. You can see we have 4 ORs and 2 endo rooms. So here's our 4 ORs, our 2 endo rooms down here. Everything in this space, and I'll show you, everything in the tan area is what we classify as an egress corridor, which means occupants can use that space to exit the building. You can see the exits classified by the red arrows. So that means anyone either within the surgical department or outside the surgical department can access this space to exit the building. In order to make that happen, all of the OR rooms must do what's called positive latch, which is generally what we find with a door with a doorknob or a handle, very similar to what you might find in any general room, your office, rooms at home. It has that latch that latches the door closed. And the reason we need that is because our corridor walls are classified as smoke resistive. And a fire creates pressure that will suck a door open and allow smoke to exit a room that might have a fire in it. So we want that door to stay closed via that positive latch. The other thing we can't have in egress corridors is storage. So we can't have any equipment, anything in these spaces. That whole area of that egress corridor must be maintained clear. Now here's that same space, but now we have designed it as a suite. We have added additional doors down here at the bottom and created the whole area as a surgical department patient care non-sleeping suite. Now our egress corridors are the tan area, which is very important because now no one can enter that OR suite to egress the building. They can, or exit the building. They can actually travel over to the side and egress out via the other exit. So the requirements for these types of suites are, they are limited to 10,000 square feet or less. This is very important because a lot of ORs are much larger than 10,000 square feet, especially in our larger hospitals. You must be able to get from anywhere within that suite to an egress door within 100 feet of travel. And we'll show you how that works. There needs to be at least 2 egress doors, okay? And one of those doors must access an egress corridor, and I'll show you that visually so you can see what that means. And then again, the occupants outside of the suite cannot egress through the suite. So this is actually really beneficial because we don't want people outside of the surgical suite to enter the surgical suite to try to get out of the building. We want to maintain that sterile environment as much as possible. But we need to be very careful with this because obviously, like we talked about, 10,000 square feet is not very big. And we also can't create suites that create corridors that just stop and don't access an exit to the exterior of the building or a stair. So here is an example of a much larger OR department, a surgical department. As you can see, we actually have 3 separate suites here, and I will show you the different suites a little bit larger. This top suite is very big. It's 9,950 square feet, so it's very close to our limitation. And then we have a 9,349 square foot suite, and then an 8,057 square foot suite. But in doing this, you can see that we have multiple egress doors out to the exterior, out to the egress corridor. We have an egress door to stair 4. We have an egress door to the adjacent suite. So we're going to actually go through each one of those. This is much closer to our suite 1. Again, I'll point out egress corridor, both of those are egress doors. This is an egress door to the adjacent suite, and then we have an egress door into the stair. So remember that the requirement is we need at least 2 egress doors, and at least one of them must go to an egress corridor, which in this case would be over here. All right, so our next suite, suite 4, we have egress door to adjacent suite, egress door to a egress corridor, egress door to an egress corridor, and an egress door to an adjacent suite. Again, we've met all the requirements, we meet all the travel distances, and we can use that space how we wish. And I'll show you all the benefits to that in a moment. And then here's suite 5. Again, we have egress corridor, a door here to the egress corridor, an egress door here to adjacent suite, and then we have an egress door here to a little corridor that then gets us to stair 8. All these are completely code compliant and really help us out in our ways to make suites really beneficial to us. So why do we want to design suites? First, it saves us time. And this is, in my view and in my opinion, more important than the money part, but you're going to see why. So it saves us time because we now do not have egress corridors within the suite. So we are permitted to put that equipment out into that space that was the egress corridor that we now are not, we're not classifying as an egress corridor. We are now classifying it as a room. So we can put our equipment right out there, which means the staff can run out of the OR room, grab something, take it in. We don't have to worry about it restricting the egress corridor. And the staff can leave the gurneys and sometimes beds that I've seen out in that space rather than being worried about moving them into some room somewhere where they're too far away from the OR room. They just leave them out right outside the door. They can grab them easily to move the patient. There's also no need to scrub as often because we're not trying to open that door via a handle or a doorknob or some kind of thing, some button that we have to push, which then reduces our infection rates, which is obviously very important. And finally, citations from those accrediting organizations. And we all understand that getting that citation is a lot of time. We have to document how we fixed it. We have to deal with all the impact of changing, whether that be construction or something else, or even staff impact to alleviate those citations. So that's all time that it takes for us to deal with those situations. So now, how does the suite save us money? So obviously, if we design the suite ahead of time when we're designing the space, save money on door hardware because we're not required to meet those positive latching requirements. So we don't have to get those really expensive door hardware sets that either open automatically or open with a wave or a push button or something that will create that positive latching, but make it so that the staff doesn't have to touch the door. Those are very expensive. They're thousands of dollars per door. And if you have a very large operating area, you have lots of doors that are going to need that requirement. But if you call it a suite, all of those requirements go away and you don't have to have all that additional hardware. The second is the building code has a requirement that your egress corridor walls must extend to the deck above. You don't have to do that if you design the space as a suite. So there's wall construction requirements that that you don't have to meet, and you don't have to spend the money to construct those additional walls. Now, those two things are cost savings when we're dealing with a new design. But a lot of times we build these spaces and 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we realize that we really should have designed them as a suite. And we are going to talk about how to do that at the end of this presentation. But when we do that, it's a lot more expensive, obviously, because we've already constructed all the stuff to meet the initial requirements. But now we need to construct new walls, add new doors to create those new suites in an existing space. So that's even more money for construction, those kinds of things. Now, you might say, well, how is staff happiness going to save me money? You're making life easier for your staff in your surgical departments. You're retaining your staff, which means then you can have more cases, and you're just creating an environment where your staff feels like they're doing they have an easier job. It's already very difficult, as we know, in our surgical departments. So if you're making life easier for them, you're going to retain more of them. And then finally, obviously, just like in the time, citations from our accreditation organizations cost us money. And because we usually have a time limit that we need to fix them in, and that means a lot more money to ship in things quickly or construct things quickly, and which then results in a higher cost for those things, including labor. So, what about existing surgical departments? You can create suites out of existing surgical departments. And I'm actually going to back up a little bit and show you some things and discuss one of the original suites that I showed you. So we're going to back up here real quick, and I'm going to show you this suite here. So I visited this facility approximately 4 years ago. It was an existing facility, and they were having a serious problem because they had a whole bunch of storage in their egress corridors, which again look like that. And they were having problems maintaining the latches on the OR doors because the staff just kept running beds or gurneys into them or trying to hit them open, and the latches weren't working appropriately. So they were getting cited by their accrediting organization for that problem. So I showed them this situation. If they were to add these two sets of double doors, they could create this suite. Now, that means obviously that they would need to add the two sets of double doors, so there's cost there, and construct the walls around those two sets of double doors. Unfortunately, this assessment was done during COVID pandemic times, and it was very difficult to order the doors at that time. I'm sure we might all remember the fact that there was quite a delay in all shipping of all types of things. So getting doors sometimes took upwards of 6 months to a year. Unfortunately, in this specific case, they never installed the doors. So they continue to operate as if this space was a suite, but never installed the doors. So they just recently had a accreditation survey and were cited because the suite didn't have doors. So we ended up moving back to this arrangement for them. So now they have to go back and make sure that their OR doors and their endo doors are positive latching, and they cannot put storage in that egress corridor. And we can have occupants from down here actually go up into these spaces, especially in our endo space, which again, we understand is not as sterile, but you don't just want people kind of hanging out in these corridors. So it isn't the most opportune situation, but the facility doesn't want to spend the money to add the additional doors. But in doing so, that's where we talk about we've designed it one way, and then we came back and added these extra doors, and we're spending that additional money for those requirements. So it really saves money and time to design your surgical department as a suite in the very beginning. And as a team member, you might be C-suite, or maybe head of nursing or things of like that nature in a surgical department. If you're going through a full renovation or a new construction of your operating or surgical departments, you definitely want to require the design team to design the spaces as suites. I will tell you that a lot of architects and design professionals really don't like to design the surgery departments as a suites because it does limit them in some ways because of those square footage requirements and those means of egress requirements. However, they don't really understand the impact of how beneficial they are once that surgical department becomes operational. So we want to be very clear about how nice these are and how you want to create them for your surgical department. Having said that, I want to just make sure that everyone understands again the requirements. So we're going to go back to that very quickly. 10,000 square foot, 100-foot travel distance. at least 2 egress doors. One of those must be to an exit access corridor. And we have to remember that people outside the suite cannot enter the suite to exit the building, which again is beneficial to us for our surgical departments. And with that, I'd like to again thank you for the opportunity. And if there's any questions at all, you can email me at any time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us today. A special thank you to Compliance Vanguard for making this all happen. So thank you very much. Yeah, that was really cool. That was really cool to learn. If you guys enjoyed this workshop, don't forget to follow, leave a comment, and share this episode with your colleagues. I'm Monique Boudreau, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.